Hello from the Heartland. My name is Jenna, and this is Smarter News. News when it matters and why it matters. Our Smarter series features unique people who help us think and live smarter. Good morning. Hope you're off to a great Monday so far, wherever you are. Perhaps you're watching it a little later on this week or listening to this report a little later on this week, and we hope you're well. It is Monday, just after 10 o'clock Central Time, March 7th. I feel like the news is changing so fast. We have to time, date, and stamp anytime we're speaking because we're watching an evolving story in Eastern Europe that's really touching every part of the globe. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today. I was thinking about this before I used to get on the air on television news, on a typical hour show, for example. There would always be that breaking animation. Do you know what I'm talking about? On television, right at the start of an hour, there's usually like a big sound and an animation and bright lights, which is supposed to be a way to catch the viewer's attention and bring you right into the story. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it's actually overused to the point that you actually don't know when you have to pay most attention. And I was thinking about that today and how relieved I am that I don't have to do that anymore because there's a point to that. Listen, it's great to get people's attention on the news. I obviously love the news. I hope that you love the news as well, or you're learning to love the news again through Smarter News. But it's very easy to lose track of why stories matter when you're trying just to chase every new development. And I thought that's where we really need to start today. Why does the story matter in Ukraine? Why does it matter what's happening between Russia and Ukraine? Let's just go zoom way out in all of this. Why does this all matter? Fundamentally, we don't want anyone to be hurt, injured, killed. I don't want that for you. I don't want that for anybody else. We want everybody to pursue the life that they want to live and the dreams that they want to pursue. We want all of that for each other here in the United States and otherwise. And war disturbs that. It sounds basic, but we have to keep going back to that point because I never want to go over the three things I have for you today and be insensitive to what we're watching on the human side, which is very difficult to watch. And the images are coming at us so quickly that I know it's difficult to digest. It's difficult for me to digest, and I don't want to lose the humanitarian side as we're also watching the analytical side when we're covering the news. What are the facts that we can apply to this story? So I just want to start there today. Very basic, very human. I think we just need to say it out loud. We don't want war. We actually want peace. This is why this story matters. We don't want disruption in anyone's life or injury. This is why this story matters. So let's go from that point on. So I do have three different facts for you today. All of these are sort of setting the table for the week ahead, and they will become important as the week goes on. Hopefully also, as we've talked about in the past, just providing a foundation. So when you're stepping into a new news cycle, you have something underneath your feet to say, okay, I know a little bit about this. So obviously one of the big stories that we're watching today in Ukraine is the attacks on civilians that are trying to evacuate. And as we're watching Russian forces get closer to the capital city of Kyiv, we're watching this also escalate in these sort of suburban areas. I want to show you a map because this is always helpful to see where Kyiv is. We have Holly McKay, who's still in Kyiv. Hopefully we'll be able to talk to her a little later on today. We have a report from her coming up. But if you can see just to the left, kind of the left side of your screen, and if you're listening on our podcast, what you should know is that this is about roughly a 30-minute drive from the center of Kyiv, kind of the suburban area that was under attack earlier today. And the kind of the precursor for this is knowing that there's a third round of talks happening between the Russian side and the Ukrainian side today. Before these talks were happening, there was heavy attacks on civilians throughout the weekend. And again, these are people that are trying to leave. And there was all this talk in the past about humanitarian corridors and providing a safe passage for people. And that's not what was happening. That's not what the Russians were not allowing that. And they were attacking innocent people. So you can see that the forces are getting closer to the seat of government. This really matters because if Russia's able to take Kyiv, which would be, we've talked about this last week, if the city falls to Russian forces, that's the seat of the government. And in many ways, it's symbolic for the entire country. Does that mean the entire country falls to Russian control? No, but these are the high stakes because this is where the government is. It's like Washington, D.C. It's the same sort of thing. Listen, would other places in the United States be okay? Sure. But it's symbolic and it's important, logistically important as the capital city. So we're continuing to watch that. The big debate that is ongoing is what to do about this. Obviously, the Ukrainians want more support, and the Europeans and the United States have have in some ways said, yes, we're going to give you more support, but it's not necessarily the kind of the support that the Ukrainians want, such as a no-fly zone. And we've talked a little bit about the two sides of the no-fly zone. One is that the no-fly zone would keep Russian aircraft, in theory, out of the country or out of certain areas to either allow safe passage for people to evacuate or allow attacks to stop. The trouble is that if you have a no-fly zone, you have to enforce it. The United States says that we're not willing to do that. Neither are NATO nations. They don't want to be dragged into a direct combat that could happen if you have to face off against a Russian aircraft. So that's just the no-fly zone. Let's talk about foreign aid. This is the one thing I want to talk to you about today. How much money, or what are we talking about when it comes to foreign aid? Because while there is a request for more support, it's also important to know that the United States and others, but I'll focus on the United States right now, has actually provided a lot of support to Ukraine over the last several years. And in fact, that support has increased for the most part really since the first invasion by Russia in 2014. I have a little graph for you, and this just gives you, again, a big overview of the sort of aid that has been going to Ukraine. Now, tricky part when you hear the word aid. Aid doesn't necessarily need cold, hard cash. It doesn't necessarily mean that. It could also mean equipment, military gear. It can mean planes. It can mean all sorts of different things. And so you do have to sift through this a little bit to know, well, what exactly are we giving Ukraine when it comes to the support that they want? For example, if they wanted aircraft or they wanted certain bombs or some ammunition, that would be more military aid. And so if you're looking on your screen now, the red line, it signifies the military aid portion of the foreign aid. So you can see that military aid has gone up over the past several years, but it also has sort of flattened out in recent times. So yes, it's more than the past, but it's not necessarily growing as much as the foreign aid. The Biden administration has talked about supplying about $1 billion of foreign aid to Ukraine in 2020, which is the last kind of known good hard data when it comes to foreign aid. We gave about just under $700 million to Ukraine, a variety of different aid. Now, we need context for that. $700 million, how does that compare to other places? Afghanistan was the top recipient of aid in 2020. That was closer to $4 billion. Israel gets just over $3 billion. So Ukraine doesn't break into the top 10 of places we give foreign aid, but it is in the top 20. And that's something that you should know in the past. So there's a lot of questions about what aid could look like moving from this point on. Talk about whether or not aid when it comes to military equipment could come from Poland, a NATO nation, and the United States could resupply Poland for what they give to Ukraine. There's somewhat of a creative thinking about how to do this in the right way, how to continue to support Ukraine. The question is, will it actually get there in time? How effective will it be? And in a chaotic situation, what does it even look like to get, let's say, a fighter jet into Ukraine at this exact moment? So there's obstacles to that. But I do want you to know that in the past, even before this conflict was taking place, before the war on Ukraine by Russia, there were hundreds of millions of dollars of your taxpayer money that was or aid going to Ukraine in the effort to support Ukraine and to support their government. And we use foreign aid in a lot of different ways all around the world. We'll talk a little bit about that and how we're using it. It's going to be this is a big part of understanding foreign policy and our priorities. But I don't know about you. I never really thought about how much money the United States was giving Ukraine prior to this. And so that just gives you a little bit of an idea. So just under $700 million in 2020, a promise of more than $1 billion by the Biden administration. Overall, over the course of this kind of current time period, there was another $350 million apparently that was requested by the Biden administration in military aid and a more request for Congress. Remember, Congress, your representative, allocates our money. They have the purse strings. So when it comes to really big foreign aid, Congress has to be involved. And so that's something that we should be watching as a continuing story. So in the course of all of this question of like, what can the United States be doing more? What can Europeans be doing more? What should be happening in Ukraine? There was a series of announcements made by Secretary Antony Blinken. Tony Blinken, as he's called Tony, Antony, that's what you should know. Jennifer was asking, what is the states of the neighboring countries of Ukraine? And I just want to bring this up real quick as we get to the third point you need to know about today. So This is where our Secretary of State was over the last several days. Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, these are all NATO members. His presence there is in diplomatic measure to make sure to show these countries that we continue to support them. Why? Because they are close to where the fighting is happening in Ukraine, and there's a question about whether or not Vladimir Putin would want to go further than Ukraine into their territories, which would be a huge, big deal. Obviously, if any NATO country is attacked in any way, that is the alliance is that we will all support each other. Moldova is not a member of NATO. You can see that just to the south of Ukraine. And Secretary Blinken went there as well. Again, a show of support in this area. Now, what Secretary Blinken did yesterday was interesting in timing. He was asked on the Sunday shows, which are these large network shows, ABC, NBC, CBS does these large Sunday shows, they're broadcast everywhere. If a cabinet official like a Secretary of State is speaking, he's speaking to a global audience. And he was asked about an oil embargo of Russia. Russia is one of the number one producers of oil and natural gas in the entire world. And he said something that we hadn't heard from him, that he was speaking to European counterparts on potentially putting forward an oil embargo. Now, that has instant effect. That would be devastating to Russia's economy, but it would also cause a lot of upheaval in the oil markets. We're already seeing that today. So we saw oil prices hit a more than a decade high. You're seeing gas prices really close to a record high. This is something important to note. When we're talking about oil prices and gas prices, they are obviously connected. But if you see record high for oil prices, that doesn't necessarily mean in the same moment you're going to see record prices in gas. Okay, so if you see a headline like that, you can know that there's going to be higher prices likely coming, but it's not necessarily instantaneous. We're talking about future prices of oil when we're talking about it being traded on the stock market or in the commodities market. Now, what is important to note is that if I could pull this, let me see how this works for you. So how much does the oil market make up your gas prices? It's just under 50%. So there's a lot of things that go into your gas prices, like taxes, depending on where you live, which affects the price of gas. I always thought this sort of obsession with gas prices, it always bothered me when I lived in New York because I didn't own a car. And some of you may not own a car either and be like, okay, there's an obsession with gas prices. A lot of people own cars and a lot of people drive. But remember, it's not just about whether or not you drive. It's also about your Amazon delivery. It's about how much it costs to get food from the farm to your grocery store. It has all sorts of implications, gas prices and oil prices, that we don't often think about. So oil prices make up about half of what you're seeing at the tank when you're filling up your tank. And then you have a couple other things that are also variables that will make the price of gas in your state different than another state. So what we're looking at on average, though, is a price of just over $4 a gallon in the United States of America. That's a really big deal. That's more than 40 cents. It's 40 cents up in a week, which is a huge move. Often we could see a couple pennies here and there. To see 40 cents is a really big move from where we were last week. You have analysts saying that we could break the record high of an average gallon of gas in the country by tomorrow, by Tuesday, because of what we're seeing in the oil markets. So important to note that higher gas prices are likely to come. This veiled threat of an embargo is really important to pay attention to. Interesting that the Secretary of State put that out there before these conversations were happening between Ukrainians and Russians today. Those conversations are ongoing right now. So that's sort of the timing all matters in this. But bottom line for you is that you will be paying more for gasoline. You will likely see this added pressure to an already inflationary environment where we're seeing a lot of higher prices. So that's really important to note. Tip on that. An analyst that I follow closely is Patrick DeHaan. He's with GasBuddy.com. If you haven't checked out GasBuddy.com, they actually have an app. I haven't used that, but I've used their website. And you can go on their website and you can plug in your zip code and it'll tell you where the cheapest gas is in your area. I did it this morning. There's a difference in gasoline prices in my area up to $0.25 a gallon of gas, which adds up. And it's all within driving distance. So I could have made a smarter buy for gasoline than I did last night. But if you need a tip on that, GasBuddy.com, it's really useful and it's going to be handy during a time when there's a lot of volatility. But expect some record high prices. Okay, here's your final thing that you should know today. Venezuela. I'm going to be watching closely whether or not the White House says anything about this on the record. But over the weekend, there were reports, legitimately enough reports in American media, placed in American media, the Washington Post, New York Times, You have Senator Marco Rubio commenting on it. So do we have confirmed from the White House yet? No, but it's enough that I need to talk to you about it. A meeting of high-level diplomats or representatives of the United States going to Venezuela. Why would they be going to Venezuela at this time? I thought we weren't really talking to Venezuela, right? Rogue nation, dictator, socialist government, all those things. We actually supported the other guy that was challenging the current president. Well, Venezuela has the largest amount of oil reserves in the entire world. And the timing of that can't be forgotten. Venezuela also has relationships with Russia and Iran. The reason why I want to show you Venezuela too is check this out. When I say Venezuela, it's really easy to think, man, Venezuela's far away. Venezuela is not that far away. When you look at a map, you realize how close Venezuela actually is to the United States. And this is why Venezuela's strategic relationships with Russia and Iran really matter, because it is a strategic country with close proximity to the United States, militarily or otherwise. Now, why would these diplomats be going, and again, these representatives, perhaps diplomats is a more official term, so I probably shouldn't be using that, representatives going to Venezuela? Well, oil could be a reason, because if there's a removal of Russian oil and natural gas off the market, then the question is, how do you backfill it? Obviously, people here will say, well, let's just open up development here in the United States. That's definitely an option. But remember, even if you know where the oil is, you got to get it out of the ground and you got to do all the things to make it usable. So it's also about making sure that what's available out there can be easily brought into the market. And there's different levels on that, just broadly speaking. Venezuela has the reserves, doesn't necessarily have all the ways to transport it, but it is a country that's built on oil. And so the timing of this is really critical to watch. Also interesting to watch, just want to show you one more thing. If you were flying from Miami to Caracas, it's like a 3-hour flight. So think about it. It takes you longer to fly coast to coast. That's how close Venezuela is. So we have to watch this story. We also have to watch the conversations that are happening between the United States and Iran on their nuclear deal. Russia, by the way, was involved in those talks as well, because Iran also has a huge amount of oil that could be brought into the market that hasn't been on the market because of sanctions related to their nuclear program. They say it's peaceful. Other people say otherwise. Those are the two sides. But you can see this sort of flurry of activity around countries that are really oil producing as a way to potentially offset what could happen if Russia is removed from the global markets. If you see anything related to that, about an embargo on Russian oil products, I mean, that would be huge news. There would be immediate effect of that. And we'd also want to see what other things could be happening in tandem, what other deals could be announced to try to offset what that can mean for the global economy, because it wouldn't just be the United States that would be affected. It would be the entire world is affected by oil prices. You had a great question, Jeanette. Jeanette wanted to know more about China. Real quick on that. One of the things that's happened over the last couple of days in China is this kind of annual legislative meeting where the leaders in China and their Communist Party have an opportunity to come together. And there were some comments at the end of this meeting that seemed a little more cool towards Russia and a little bit more towards trying to be helpful in some sort of resolution. In the past, that wasn't the case necessarily from China. The United States says we'll wait and see what they actually do, because China opened their markets to some Russian goods as a way to kind of offset the penalties against Russia with those additional sanctions that the world has put on Russia. So China is a place to watch. But here's something interesting. One of the top lawmakers said that the comparisons that the world is making between Russia and Ukraine and China and Taiwan don't work. And he said this, he said, that's because Ukraine is a sovereign nation and Russia is a sovereign nation. We're talking about two sovereign nations. China doesn't consider Taiwan a sovereign nation. China considers Taiwan part of China. But the fact that he wanted to say that out loud and actually said Ukraine is a sovereign nation is important. So we'll see whether or not there is, again, more of a chill coming towards Russia along with these added pressures. And what are these all for? These are all diplomatic efforts to try to force a change in behavior in Russia. You know, what does that look like in the meantime? A lot of wait and see. So I'm going to continue to watch all these developing stories. Those are the three things that you should know. You should know a little bit about foreign aid that has gone to Ukraine in the past and that could be going there in the future. Some say it's not enough. Some will say we've done a lot. There's two sides to that are rich in debate. Number two, you're seeing record highs in oil and in gas prices already. We should expect to see more of that in the next several days, even maybe even the next several hours. And number three, we have to watch conversations that are happening between America, Venezuela, and Iran, large oil producers that could be a piece of this puzzle. A lot of critiques of the Biden administration from Republicans like Senator Marco Rubio. And this is a question about, making a deal and what's it worth to make a deal. Short-term and long-term implications of any sorts of deals between when it comes to Venezuela or when it comes to Iran, especially when it comes to Iran's nuclear program. So those are the important things to know about. Some of you are mentioning Canada. I just want to mention Canada real quick. The number one oil producer for import in America is Canada. So if we think about Middle East, right, we think about all these different countries far away, but it's really our neighbor to the north. Thank you, Canada. Why is the U.S. still buying Russian oil? Great question. The imports, Russia makes up about 7% of oil imports into the United States. So it's not a huge amount, but it's significant. The question of why and whether or not we should be doing it is richly debated amongst all political circles, not only the ones that are currently in office, but before that. So important things to know. A lot of questions as well about what's going on with oil fields and American pipelines. The only thing I'll say, go back to that point, is that having the resources and being able to quickly get them to market can be two different things. I'm not excusing or trying to explain policy, but that's important to know. And understanding how that the oil market's interesting. It's like life. Everything's sort of like life. It's all like life. It's not just the practicality of something happening, the logistics. It's the thought of it happening as well. So it's the perception that matters. If the United States suddenly got way more aggressive, even symbolically, when it came to our energy resources, that could have an immediate impact on the oil market. It could be the promise and the perception of that can actually affect prices. It's not as technical as just as the barrels getting to market, but I also think that's important to know that some of this stuff can happen just right away. All right. So some of you are asking where the tip jar is. I appreciate that. If you're watching us live on Instagram, at the very bottom of your screen, you can actually tap, and I'll do a little video for you later so you could see. You could tap on a little square down there, like down there at the bottom of your screen, and it'll allow you to give us a tip. So it'll be like 99 cents, for example. And you could actually tip us while you're watching the Instagram live. If you can't figure that out, because sometimes I can, sometimes I can't, if you just go to our quick links on Instagram or on our website, you'll see Support Smarter News, and you could just send us a tip, send us a cup of coffee, anything you feel that we want you to be happy with what we're doing. So if you feel compelled to do that, thank you so much. If you don't feel compelled to do it, you can't do it today, we're still going to be here for you. We're trying to figure out a different model in the news business that works besides cluttering your entire life with ads and subscriptions and gated content, because I actually hate all of those things. And I created Smarter News to be a solution in news, not to repeat past mistakes. So we're trying to figure it out. So this is just one way that you can do that. You also see that our retail store is going to come back online shortly, and that's going to be another way. So you're going to have a couple different venues to help support us, and we really appreciate you. But really remember, and this is true of any story, but it's also true of our business, the most valuable thing you can bring is your presence. The larger that Smarter News grows, the more leverage we have as a news organization to get the interviews, to do the things that we need to do, to make the investments that we need to make, to actually produce smarter news. So just want to make sure that you know that you're valuable, your presence is really valuable, and that's not overlooked as well. All right, guys, so we'll be back on Thursday with our regular debrief with all of your questions, and we'll take a look at some of these stories with updates, but more updates throughout the week on social media and always on our website. Don't forget that social media can be tricky, but we're always there for you on our website on smarternews.com. So welcome your questions, your comments. Love seeing you. Thank you so much. Hope you're off to a great week, and I'll see you with more on smarternews.com. Bye. Quick, concise, nonpartisan, Smarter News, a refuge from the storm. I'm Jenna. Thank you for choosing smarter.